Welcome to the Finding the Magic podcast, where books come alive. I'm Tricia Copeland, a fiction author and host of this show. If you love books, finding great reads, and hearing about the story behind the story directly from the authors, this is the place for you. Whether you like fantasy, science fiction, dystopian, or romance titles, I think you'll find something to love in my playlist. Listen in to discover something magical about a book or two today.
All right. There we go.
James,
Hi there. Good to hear from you.
you too. Thank you for being on the show. We have author James Bow. He is a young adult science fiction author, and I'm super excited. This is one of my favorite genres. So, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with your new release that comes out November 12th?
Yeah, there's two releases that are coming out. There's my new YA science fiction novel, The Sunrunners, set on Mercury. That's coming out with Shadowpaw Press, and there's a companion anthology that goes alongside it called Tales from the Silence. I've written some stories for that, but I've also gathered some authors from across Canada and some guests from Australia and the UK to sort of a series of short stories that are set in the same universe as the Sunrunners. And we have some launch parties planned, and I'm looking forward to putting it out in the world.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Well, tell me about Sunrunners and this world and a little bit about the sci-fi aspect.
Well, the idea behind the Sunrunners focuses on Mercury, but the background information is that the Earth doesn't solve climate change. Instead, it just sort of pushes the consequences back. And to the point where around 2150, things catch up to it, and the Earth ends up collapsing and going silent, leaving behind a series of colonies in the inner solar system, Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the asteroid belt, that now have to deal with the fact that the Earth isn't there anymore. It isn't going to interfere anymore, but it also isn't going to help anymore. So, how do they deal with that? The Sunrunners, it focuses on Mercury at the start of the silence and at the end of the silence, and it's sort of an intergenerational tale of dealing with this big trauma and how things change every 50 years. The main character is a young woman named Frieda, who, because of tough decisions made by her grandmother, is essentially the queen of her latitude town, which is among the cities in Mercury that are always moving to keep ahead of the sun. So it's been likened to a combination of The Crown with Snowpiercer. So uh, if that doesn't turn some heads, hopefully, I don't know what will.
Well, definitely. I mean, you have this, well, obviously it's a monarchy society, right? And it's matriarchal, I guess, or does it matter?
uh,
Um,
yeah, it's a mix of things. They've basically grabbed done what they can, and so it was initially military, but Frieda's grandmother Adelheid, who became the highest ranking officer, sort of named herself. There's a Dutch term called stadtholder, which is not a king; it's a steward, somebody that like supposedly takes over and is there temporarily until the right people come along. But then 50 years later, this is still happening. So yeah, so her phraseology when somebody calls her out on this, when she starts saying this up, it's like, this sounds like a king. What are you doing? And she says, my people deserve better than to be ruled by a military government. And it's like, your people. So,
well, fun. And tell me about the sci-fi aspects because do you do a lot of research to make sure that your sci-fi is believable and actually could happen, or is it more of a fantastical sci-fi?
I mean, realistically, I'm probably in the realm of science fantasy here. Where I mean, my biggest influence is Doctor Who, so they tend and Star Trek, and they tend to play fast and loose with the actual science. But I did have to sort of thoroughly think about how Mercury rotates in its orbit, and oh, that gave me some headaches. um, and I mean, most of my research really comes from reading other books, other science fiction writers that I like. I mean, and I show my work here. The whole idea of a colony on Mercury that is constantly moving to stay ahead of the sun is taken from Kim Stanley Robinson's book 2312, where he has the city of um, Terminator, which is, on these rails, which are expanding as the sun's, heating them up, and that sort of keeps pushing them onto the darkness. And I use that as an inspiration. And then I showed my work because then I said that the rails that these latitude towns were actually physically running on were Robinson rails. And the speech to the tourists is, or the speech to the people visiting the track works is named for a renowned 21st century philosopher Kim Stanley Robinson, who envisioned yada yada yada. So that way I show my work and I give credit where it's due, and hopefully Mr. Robinson appreciates the shout out.
Yeah, because Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. So they
Yes.
would be dealing with extreme heat and have to have all the technology and the systems to stay safe from that. Maybe humans have evolved a little bit to handle that. I
Yeah,
don't know.
it's the years in the story is 2151 and 2200. So no, the humans have not really evolved. It's all technology.
Okay.
And I mean, and the brilliant thing in Kim Stanley Robinson's work is that he designed the system to be fail safe. It's an act of physics that the sun heats up the rails expand, and they sort of push the city forward. And so theoretically, this thing can go on forever. It doesn't. You'll have to read his story to find out, but it's still one of those sort of things that where the best science is the one that works like it works the simplest, and so there are fewer points of failure. So that's, given some of the things we have in our world, that's a lot of science fiction too.
Right. And do you have a science background or no?
Oh no, my background as in university was urban planning. So, but that does, I guess, give me a background in. I like to see how cities work and how people sort of live in these cities. So there may be something there. Um, when I'm not a very keen researcher, but I do remember details going back years. So somebody asked me, "How do you come up with your ideas?" And I said, "Well, there was a class in grade 10 that I learned this, and I eventually came to use it." So uh, you never throw anything away with these things. Yeah.
Well, and I realized my questions assuming that they were human characters. We hadn't
Oh yeah.
even gotten to yet, right?
Oh yeah. They're human characters. Yeah. There is. It's the inner solar system. So I mean, that's all there is, except for one story in Tales from the Silence where they're dealing with the Jupiter moons, but that's another story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you have all humans, no alien contact here.
No, that's true.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And how did you decide to write like young adult science fiction? What was that progression like for you?
Well, I mean, young adult is how I got started, and young adult is one of the types of books that I just most love to read, even though I am an adult. Uh, the whole coming of age storyline, which is, permeates the young adult genre, is a very powerful storyline that if you want, you read if you want to see your characters change, the whole coming of age story is guaranteed to see that change. Um, it's very satisfying to see these characters come to realize who they are, and that's what I like to read, and that's what I like to write. And so I started with YA fantasy with a trilogy of short fantasy, young sort of, I guess they're called portal fantasy because it was people from our world encountering going into the fantasy world, uh, and I just sort of have stayed in the area. Um, my previous science fiction work, Icarus Down, is also YA and produced by Scholastic in 2016. My only real foray into adult was with The Night Girl that came out in 2019. And it still came from a YA mindset because it's about this young woman who enters the workforce for the first time and discovers that she finds work as an employment as a sort of a min assistant for a employment agency that finds jobs for goblins and trolls. You could say their boss is a real troll, but no, he's a goblin. That's okay, type of thing. And so, I mean, the YA sensibility is there, and that this young woman who is leaving home for the first time is going to find out who she is. At the same time, it's not a YA story because it's about something a bit older. That it's about, it's a little bit too much to ask teenagers to care about jokes about office politics. So it and I found this in my beta readers where the teens were getting a little bit bored. 20 somethings loved it. And so that became a new adult story. So these genres tend to bleed into each other. They each share sort of certain elements with each other, and just where they end up coming out um, depends on the story themselves. I never set out specifically to write a YA story, except that's what I like to read, and that's sort of how the story forms. And that's sort of what is the case with the Sunrunners. And yeah, so yeah, so how's that?
Yeah, no, I love YA too. So you're speaking my language.
Yeah, fair enough. Thanks.
So jumping back to the Sunrunners, you talked about the main character is a queen. Remind me her name.
Frieda.
Frieda.
There's
Sorry.
actually two main characters, sort of. I mean, it's the narrative jumps between the beginning of the silence and the end of the silence when the earth wakes up and reaches out. And Frieda is at the end of the silence, and she locks horns with her grandmother, who we see at the start of the silence. So Lieutenant Adeheid Koning is at the start of the silence, and she eventually becomes colonel and then names herself as stadtholder. And 2 generations later, we see Frieda and how she deals with her grandmother, and sort of how they got from there to here. So, yeah.
And that's where the book kind of starts after, like, at the end of the silence where Earth is reaching back out, it sounds like, right?
Yeah. We start with Frieda, and she has this horrible accident happen to her, which costs her like most of an arm and part of her other hand. And at the same time, her mother is killed in this accident. So she is, she is severely injured and also suddenly queen. And this is not something she ever wanted. She wanted to be an engineer. This is her engineering was her life goal. And so Adelheid, who is the dowager at this point, comes aboard as a regent to sort of manage things while Frieda sort of figures out, what to do, how to heal herself and what to do with herself. And then when the earth reaches out, she has to deal with how to react to this major change in their circumstance. So yeah.
And I'm in my mind, I'm just jumping to the fact that do they go back to Earth? Do they stay on Mercury? Is that in play, or am I going wrong there?
They're the struggle with Adelheid is with the Earth gone. How do they survive since they've been importing most of their food? By Frieda's time, they are self-sufficient and they're going to stay on Mercury. At one point, Frieda even refers to Earth as grandmother Earth rather than mother Earth. She is a daughter of Mercury. And so the real question with Earth is, it's like, yeah, it's good that they've woken up. Why are they coming here so fast? What do they want? Do they have sort of plans themselves that they're keeping secret? And is this good for Mercury or not? Adelheid's suspicious as all get out, and Frieda's like, we've been isolated for 50 years. People want to have this contact. What are you doing? And so that's the point of conflict between the two of them. And finding out what Earth exactly does want is part of the mystery of the story.
Oh, okay, fine. There's
Yeah.
a lot. And does it jump between Adelaide's time and Frieda's time so that you see what happened in the past, or is it just
Yeah.
kind of her tell? Okay, fine.
The story is structured in parts. We have like 4 chapters with Frieda, and then she asks the question, what on earth would make my grandmother want to be stadtholder? We go back to the
Okay,
start of the silence for 4 chapters, and then we come back and we go back. It it alternates until everything sort of comes together, and Adelheid's story concludes, and Frieda has to sort of take over in earnest. So yeah.
fine. And is it first person, or do we get a third person look at everything?
In this case, it's a third person story, but what I try to do is I try to stay close to the characters. So it's a camera over their shoulder, but you're also privy to their thoughts. And Frieda does a lot of thinking to herself as she sort of has her eyes opened to what is going on around her, and she sort of puts things together. So I try as a narrator to stay back and let the characters tell their own stories, but I haven't gone so far as to do it as the first person. I like the first person narrative. I used it in Icarus Down, but one of the things that you inadvertently start asking is when you do this is, who are you telling the story? Who are these people telling the story to? And it didn't feel right to have that question over the readers' heads in this case, especially as we were jumping back and forth. So in this case, it's third person. The camera is really close to both characters' heads and is staying with their point of view pretty tight.
Fun. Yeah, I think, yeah, I've heard a lot of people call it like close first third person, or so
Yeah,
you're mainly getting that one character's viewpoint, but you at times do see other characters' viewpoints or what
yeah,
they're seeing. So yeah, it's a
oh
lot
yeah.
of fun. And I think sometimes the sci-fi more lends itself, and fantasy more lend itself to being that third person, so you get more of a world view there.
I think sometimes, we're influenced by the science fiction we see in movies and films. In fact, I say camera speaks volumes, I suspect. I am sort of picturing sort of how this might play out, and sort of writing accordingly. Um, yeah. So it's so yeah. It's I try. Yeah. It's I try to keep it pretty personal, but I'm not. But also at the same time, just uh, not interfering with myself as a narrator.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds, you said you've been writing for a while, you wrote Chris Down and several other sci-fi. Did you start out to become an author? Have you always wanted to be an author? You said you were in urban planning before.
Yeah. I suspect uh, writing is what I should have started doing, but when you're in high school, you're looking at a university degree that'll sort of give you a paying job, and I was interested in geography and cities and how and how that goes together. So my goal throughout my 20s and into my 30s was, it's like, I got to get an education, I got to get a job, I got to get a decent job with career prospects. And through it all, this is in the 90s, so we have things like the early recession, we have the tech bubble. It I couldn't actually land a proper career, and outside of you know uh, admin assistant work. But what I did find, that what was consistent about the stuff that I liked most about my job was writing and the creativity aspect of that. And I mean, and I decided when I was in my early 30s, is like, well, why don't I just, I mean, I've been writing fan fiction since high school,
Okay.
and why not take the next step and see if I can do something that isn't reliant on being set in someone else's universe. And I guess that was the moment I said to myself that I am a writer. It's still not a full-time job that pays for itself, but it has helped me find a job where writing is an important part of my job. I'm the communications officer for a charitable land trust, so I do a lot of writing for them. Previous to that, uh, I was also another communications officer. I called myself a consulting writer, so I did work for other people. I did some work for hire, nonfiction books for kids, a lot of that to pay the bills. So it was a blessing to be able to write for a living, even though my first love is fiction, and that's a harder thing to actually make a living out of. So, but at least I know that I am working, I am writing, and I am using my creativity, and I can't ask for anything more.
Yeah, that sounds fun. So thinking about the Sunrunners, is this a standalone, or and you have the anthology with different stories, sounds like in the same world by different
Yeah.
yourself and different authors, but is there a sequel coming? Can we look forward to
Well,
that?
yeah, I started with Frieda's story, and just when in the writing process, what I often do very early on is I throw things at the wall and I see what sticks. And I ask questions like, well, why is this like this? And if the answer is interesting, I incorporate it. So I started with Frieda's story about a young woman who would rather be an engineer, but instead is forced to be a queen. And I started with the silence and the earth coming out of it. And the silence used to be a lot longer, for Earth. And so the conflict was between Frieda and her mother was very suspicious of Earth. And I was asking myself, why would she be, when clearly everybody else really wants this reconnection? And then I realized, it's like, I need somebody who was actually there at the start. And so that role went to Frieda's grandmother, and then she became the second main character. And I asked more questions like, how did the silence start? And what other planets were there in this arrangement? Because Mercury is the first planet you would expect us to colonize. So there is a companion novel that I'm working on called The Cloud Riders. Um, it's not specifically linked to, I mean, you won't see any characters from the Sunrunners in it, but it is set on Venus and Mars soon after the silence happens. And the idea there, I liken it to a interplanetary country mouse, city mouse. We see Samantha's world on Venus, and for a variety of reasons, somebody from Mars comes to her world, old pen pal, and she has to go to Mars to sort of help him deal with this thing. So there's like culture shocks either way, because Mars and Venus are two very different planets and societies. And the same thing happened with Tales from the Silence, which I had other stories, short stories that were sort of set in this wider universe. And I wanted to have them see print. I couldn't get enough to get an anthology together unless I let other people come in and play in the sandbox. And that was a rewarding and fun experience. Just sort of like, it's scary sharing a piece of yourself, asking people to come in and play with the materials that you created, giving up that level of control. But it's also very rewarding when it comes together like that. And
yeah,
so
I would think so, like, because I have a certain idea about things in my world and what the character should be doing and where it should be going, and then someone else is going to have like a different creative vision, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was the risk. Fortunately, the universe that we've worked in is big enough that we were able to accommodate all that. So really, the universe sort of got ahead of me, but I've scratched the surface of what's in there, but that gives me a ton of territory to play with. And so we have the Sunrunners, we have the Tales from the Silence, and once I get my edits done, well, we'll see if we can get the Cloud Riders out.
Fun. And you said this was published by Shadow Press, correct?
Yes, Sunrunners is coming out with Shadow Paw Press. Tales from the Silence is coming out from Shadow Paw Press's Endless Sky imprint, and both are available on through better bookstores throughout Canada and the US, and on Amazon. But please use your independent bookstores.
Yeah, fun. And what is your website so everyone knows where to find you?
Visit me at bowjamesbow.ca. So BOWJAMESBOW.ca. It's an old sort of high school thing where it's like James Bow. Bow is an unusual name, and then in high school, the locker number they assigned me was 0070.
James Bond. Oh yeah. My goodness.
So that stuck.
Yeah. Somebody did that as a prank. I think they did. I think you were pranked.
Very likely, yeah. But I decided to run with it. Yeah.
Yeah, you might as well, right?
Absolutely.
Well, it's been amazing talking to you. I can't wait to read your book, and I think all of our listeners will feel the same way. So,
thank you.
Yeah, James Bow with his upcoming Sunrunners and Tales from the Silence. Congratulations, and hopefully, when you publish your next book, The Cloud Riders, that you can come back and talk to us about that too.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, that went well.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Finding the Magic podcast. I'm your host, author and podcaster Tricia Copeland, and I love getting behind the scenes. If you like the podcast, make sure to subscribe and stop in each week to discover new authors and books. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep finding the magic.